The article is really wonderful, and it's about the Nobel Prize winner for literature.
Yes. Yes.
And so just tell us your thought process with regard to that article.
Well, it's quite an accomplishment. I believe that she is probably the first female Asian woman to receive a Nobel Prize. She is certainly the first Korean writer to receive a Nobel Prize. And ordinarily, it would be an extraordinary celebration. But we also have to put it in the context of Palestine. She was the dark horse receiving the Nobel Prize. There were many, many people who had been shortlisted ahead of her. She's relatively a younger writer, which is, again, unusual to award the Nobel Prize to younger writers. And so I think everybody was taken by surprise, including Han Kang herself. But what I try to point out is that this is probably the closest the Nobel Committee could come to acknowledging the genocide in Palestine, because she is a writer of human atrocities. She, more than any of the other writers that were shortlisted or even on the long list, she was the person who directly witnesses and challenges our conscience of genocide and mass atrocity. So this was my reasoning, that it was probably the Nobel Committee's oblique attempt to acknowledge what is going on in the world, and also that there is a tremendous resonance with what Han Kang writes about and what we see unfolding in the present moment in Palestine. And she herself, she said when she was awarded the Nobel Prize, she said that she refused to hold a celebratory press conference because reason being, with all the wars raging between Russia, Ukraine, Israel, and Palestine, with deaths being reported every day, she could not hold a celebratory press conference. She asked for understanding in this matter.
Mhm. And I'm glad I purposely did not try to say her name because I didn't want to mess it up. So I know it's spelled Hankang. And say that again for us, KJ.
Han Kang.
Han
Han
Kang.
Kang. And it's an
Okay.
unusual name for a woman. It just means river. It's the Han River. So it's quite an unusual name. But I think there's a way in which she captures, the flow of Korean literature in her writing as well. So really quite an extraordinary writer. And if you haven't read her, I certainly recommend that you do. The one that I suggest people start with is something called Human Acts. Human Acts. Most people start with The Vegetarian, but I actually think Human Acts is a much more powerful piece, and it speaks again to the current moment. And it really is about the Gwangju massacre. This was the massacre in 1980, perpetrated by South Korean troops under US control at the time. They killed hundreds, perhaps thousands of protesting citizens. And what she does is her book is not a political tract, but it is a kind of deep, profound, philosophical and ethical exploration of what it means to witness that level of violence and atrocity. And, she asks, the question is that she asked, or the question she leaves us with is, what do we do in the face of such extreme violence and cruelty? And she also counterbalances that she also points out that under situations of extreme atrocity and brutality, you also have extreme acts of human kindness and compassion. And so she tries to, hold the two together, but she leaves us with a question. If you are faced with, this kind of atrocity, what do you do? And and she, kind of puts forth the challenge that none of us will be forgiven if we turn away.
I just checked I just got the audio book of that Human Acts, so I'm
Mm.
looking forward to listening to it.
Now, does she write anything specifically about Palestine, or do you just put two and two together and relate it to Palestine, especially based on um, her talking about the celebratory press conference?
Yeah, it's essentially I don't want to attribute any beliefs to her. I believe that, she's somebody who's capable of enunciating her own beliefs. So I'm not saying that she has written about Palestine or that she has a specific position around Palestine, other than that, that this is something that we cannot, that it's an ongoing atrocity, and there's nothing for us to celebrate there. But I'm placing her award in the context of the Nobel Committee, which, always makes political awards. I mean, we have to be very clear about this. The Nobel Prize is never about pure literary accomplishment. Otherwise, there would be, 50 authors who would have gotten it. Otherwise, it always has political overtones. It would have been impossible for the Nobel Committee to ignore the fact that Palestine is the key issue, one of the key issues that is facing humanity as a moral crisis, uh, and that this was probably their best attempt to kind of obliquely acknowledge that. Han Kang, fits the bill in a way that, say, uh, Murakami would not have, or Salman Rushdie or Thomas Pynchon, who are all shortlisted, but none of these people are, witnesses and chroniclers of human atrocity.
I noticed too that you talk about another of her books, Do Not Part or Impossible Partings, which is even, to me, more connects with the horror of Gaza in terms of all those who are still under the rubble.
Yes, yes, yeah. So, she's saying that, the I do not part in Korea, the title in Korea is I won't say farewell or impossible partings. And it is essentially, it's the message that we will not forget or abandon those people, who have been buried and slaughtered without a farewell. And, she talks about, again, another massacre in Korea before Gwangju. This is 1948, the Jeju massacres, where that was a literal genocide. Gwangju was a mass atrocity, hundreds, possibly thousands killed. But Jeju Island was a genocide. Somewhere between 10 to 30% of the population was killed. People were simply wiped out, for daring to, stand up for their rights to exist as a unified Korean state. And again, this was done with the full knowledge and direction of the United States. The Korean military was actually under the US military command at that time. And so, again, this deep, profound assertion that we will not accept that people and history will be erased. And there's an interesting line from her writing. I think that there's a professor at UC Berkeley who talks about mournable and unmournable deaths. There are deaths you can mourn and deaths you cannot mourn, that are grievable or not grievable. She talks about the Gwangju massacre, and she says that, because I could not mourn your death, my life became a funeral, because I could not. Let me read the quote, because I think it's very profound. After you died, I couldn't hold a funeral. So these eyes that once beheld you became a shrine. These ears that once heard your voice became a shrine. These lungs that once inhaled your breath became a shrine. After you died, I could not hold a funeral. And so my life became a funeral.
That's really powerful.
Wow.
And the metaphor she makes for snow,
Yes,
made me
yes,
feel like it was, all these atrocities are the same atrocity. They blanket,
yes.
they blanket us.
Yes, they blanket us, they cover us. Let me read the line again from her book. You know, uh, we shall not forget. Um, a cluster of 40 houses, give or take, had stood on the other side when the evacuation orders went out in 1948. They were all set on fire, the people in them slaughtered, the village incinerated. She told me how soldiers had murdered everyone in her village. The next day, having heard the news, the sisters returned to the village and wandered the grounds of the elementary school all morning, searching for the bodies of their father and mother, their older brother and 8-year-old sister. They looked over the bodies that had fallen every which way on top of each other and found that overnight a thin layer of snow had covered and frozen upon each face. They couldn't tell anyone apart because of the snow. And since my aunt couldn't bring herself to brush away with her bare hands, she used a handkerchief to wipe each face clean.
Mm.
So this is a constant theme that you will see in her books, people cleaning bodies, brushing away blood and snow, and to try to see things clearly, and of course to try to recover some dignity and some truth, no matter how painful it is. So there's a constant image of excavation, and she talks, that's this notion of excavating deeper and deeper to the bottom of the ocean of horror. And this is the line that you may be referring to, Harvey.
Yeah.
Snow that fell over this island, and also in other ancient faraway places, could all have condensed together inside those clouds. When at 5 years old, I reached out to touch my first snow in Gwangju, and when at 30, I was caught in a sudden rain shower that left me drenched as I biked along the riverside in Seoul, when the snow obscured the faces of the hundreds of children, women, and elders on the schoolyard here on Jeju Island 70 years ago. Who's to say those raindrops and crumbling snow crystals and thin layers of bloodied ice are not the one and the same, that the snow settling over me now isn't that very water?
My God. That is, yes, I'm going to have to get
That's
one of these
powerful. It
books.
reminds me the way she expresses herself reminds me. I don't know if you listened to the Chris Hedges report this week, a letter to Rifat Alarir.
Mm,
It has extended quotes from him there that just remind me so much of this.
yes, yes.
I wonder, it sounds like, and I'm not familiar with her, I'll be completely honest. but I'm going to be. I wonder how she became this chronicler of horror. This,
Yes.
what, because, what you said in your article about linking it to Palestine, not linking it directly, but having the Nobel Prize Committee use this as the only way that they could actually make a statement with regard to what's going on in Gaza and Palestine. And so,
Yeah.
uh, you know, I just, I just wonder how she got there, got to this point.
Well, I think, I think there's a very instructive after section, epilogue in Human Acts, where she explains how she came to write about Gwangju. And essentially, she grew up in Gwangju. She's from Gwangju herself. And apparently, she had moved out of Gwangju just a few months before the massacre happened. But this was purely, an act of, it was a random act. Her father had gotten fired, and he had moved the family to Seoul. But if he hadn't gotten fired, he was a school teacher. They would have been in Gwangju at the time that the massacre happened. Well, when she writes her novel Human Acts, it's about a young boy, and that young boy actually lived in the very room that she lived in when Gwangju happened. And he was actually one of the first casualties, one of the first people killed in Gwangju. And so it's almost like she inhabits his soul. And there is a lot of dialogue of souls in the story, but it's like she inhabits his soul, and then she depicts the happenings in Gwangju from his perspective. And if we were to psychologize, we could say that, this is a displacement, this is survivor guilt. But clearly, if it were not for a historical accident, she would be that young boy who was one of the first shot dead by paratroopers in Gwangju. And the name of the boy is actually Chehak. That's his real name, historical, is the real name of the boy. And the name of the character in her novel, the young boy. The title of Human Acts in Korean is The Boy is Coming, but the boy's name is Dong-ho. And there's a little scene where she talks about Dong-ho and how he runs away from a skirmish with the military. And again, this is, if we were to psychologize, we could say that Dong-ho is a stand-in for herself. But she says in the novel, I would have run away. You would have run away.
Mhm.
Even if it had been one of your brothers, your father, your mother, still you would have run away. Run away from the bullets, the troops.
Yeah.
There will be no forgiveness. You look into his eyes, which are flinching from the sight laid out in front of them, as though it is the most appalling thing in all this world. There will be no forgiveness, least of all for me. So she's talking about this, I would describe it as a kind of survivor guilt of having left Gwangju
Yeah.
and having survived. So I think that is a framework in which we can understand some of her writing, but also, it's a challenge for those of us who survive to bear witness and to confront, human atrocity and to take action. I think that's the meaning of her writing and the challenge that she poses to us. I think this is, a very, very apt and meaningful award. In an ideal world, the Nobel Committee would have given the award to a deserving Palestinian writer. And God knows, there are many of them brilliant powerful, extraordinary writers. But of course, the Nobel Committee can't do that. The last time it did anything on that level was when it awarded Harold Pinter the Nobel Prize. And that didn't turn out well. So Han Kang is probably the best they can do. And I think that we take that as an opportunity once again uh, to step up to the plate and to deal with the moral dilemma Han Kang challenges us with. What can we do? No, none of us will be forgiven. What is it that we can do?
Well,
What is it can we do?
if we're morally engaged and do nothing, we may never be able to forgive ourselves.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So,
Let me read you one more line from her. This is uh, when she was very, very young. And she became aware of the atrocities of Gwangju because her parents had passed around a little chapbook which was filled with photographs of Gwangju. It was passed around like a secret document. If you actually, at that time, if you had documents like that, you would have gone to prison immediately. But, the word was put out, so people were sharing these images of Gwangju. And she discovered it by accident. Her parents had shared it among the adults, and then they had put it into the top shelf of a bookshelf with the spine facing backwards. But, curious young child that she was, apparently she discovered it. So she talks about this. After it had been passed around the adults, it was hidden in a bookcase, spine facing backwards. I opened it unwittingly, having no idea what it contained. I was too young to know how to receive the proof of overwhelming violence that was contained in those pages. How could human beings do such things to one another? On the heels of this first question, another swiftly followed. What can we do in the face of such violence? And so I argue, this is the question that we should also confront. This is the question that should animate us as well.
did the title Human Acts, I mean, that clearly is not anything like a literal translation of the title she gave it. Was she participating in that decision on how to translate that? Because it really focuses
I think the
on acts.
mhm. Yes, the translator has actually written an essay about that, and she said that she struggled with the translation of the title. She was trying to capture something that, captured, the universality of the issue. She didn't want it to sound trite. If you say it in English, the boy comes, the boy's coming, it sounds
Yes.
trite, uninteresting, or even, vulgar. And so she wanted something that had some gravity. And I think she's also said that she wishes, there were other titles she could have given it, but
Yeah.
I think it stands. Yeah.
Okay. And so she's written historical dramas. She's dramatizing these horrible historical events. And just thinking about these events and just looking at facts and figures and numbers, that can be troubling as it is. But to dramatize, to really put yourself really deep in the situation so that you could then convey it accurately through drama, through a
Mhm.
story. I hope she's all right. I hope she's maybe it's a way that she helps heal herself, or you know that's got to be very troubling as far as
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And we know writers who have tackled these types of issues, like Iris Chang, who have never recovered from them. Iris Chang, chronicled the Nanjing massacre, and then she committed suicide. I've, worked with young scholars who have, documented genocide, and, they come out seriously damaged.
Mhm.
So I think that I don't think it was an easy project for her. In fact, she says she cried every day for 7 years. So, but I also think that there's meaning to the art, to this endeavor. And I think that, I mean, you listen to her voice, there's something quite extraordinary about it. It's the voice of somebody who has cried their soul out, and
Mhm.
that kind of
Mhm.
uh, resonant quality of having
Mhm.
uh, deeply, deeply grieved. That's what I hear in her voice.
Is there anything in Korea? I imagine it would be politically difficult to do, uh, like oral histories being done of all those periods where you do hear people's voices.
I think there have been some attempts. Certainly with Gwangju, there have been oral histories and some good documentation. With the Jeju massacre in 1948, it's much, much harder because it really was not simply a full-scale genocide, but following the genocide, there was a complete obliteration of the history. Everything fell into a black hole,
Mhm.
and people were not allowed to talk about it. You
Yes.
breathe a word of it, and your life is over. And so that has been so profoundly, deeply, that history has been so profoundly and deeply obliterated that there are only like fragments that we can recover. Basically, what we know is that it was a mass atrocity. The level of what we can imagine happened in Indonesia or during the colonization of the Americas, and we see the patterns and practices that we saw in Vietnam, for example. Strategic hamlets, firebombing, setting villages on fire, all of that is prefigured by Jeju, literally people being swept out of villages, everything set on fire, people being raped, and just mass murder, people lined up and shot to death. Apparently, the Jeju massacre dovetailed into what was later called the Border League massacres, but apparently they were killing people at such this incredible rate that the Japanese government complained. The Japanese government complained that there were too many bodies washing up on their shores 500 miles away. People were being shot, dumped into the ocean, and then you would have hundreds, thousands of bodies just floating out, and enough of them were landing on the shores of Japan that the Japanese government filed an official complaint. So I think that gives you a sense of, what that was like. And I've always said, and I mean it in all sincerity, Korea was like Gaza. It's literally what we see, but it was like Gaza with snow. So this
Yeah.
is a recurring pattern under imperialism and colonialism.
Well, in Gaza, I guess I just saw news this last week. 3 infants have died just by freezing to death.
Yeah.
So
Mhm.
maybe Gaza will have that. So her name again is
Han
Han
Kang.
Hangang.
Hangang, Hangang, Hankang. And the
So
book that I recommend people read is Human Acts. And I'll just read you the line. You know, there's a question, there's a kind of a give and take in one of her novels, and she asks the question, even the infants, that is to say, were even the infants killed?
Mhm.
And she says, yes, because total annihilation. was the goal. And I think, that's something that we see in the current moment.
In the current moment. Good Lord.
Mm.
All right. Well, thanks for updating us. Thanks for catching us up with this this wonderful author who just won the Nobel Prize last October for literature, and more